During his budget presentation 2 weeks prior, opposition spokesman on finance Julian Robinson provided an alternative method to fund the current budgetary needs outside of raising new taxes. This scheme, he said, would tap into additional tax compliance measures and attract remote foreign workers. He added that this would also end the annual government drawdown of $11 billion from the National Housing Trust, NHT. But Finance Minister Favour Williams says this simply does not hold water.
Madam Speaker, the maths is not mathsing. When you replace recurring revenue stream, which is what the NHT contribution and the revenue measures are, when you replace those with debt, you have to keep borrowing because next year you will be in the same position. You have to find borrowed funds again to replace the recurring NHT and revenue measures, and it never stops.
While agreeing that added revenue from tax compliance is always welcome, Minister Williams says an e-invoicing initiative, as proposed by Robinson, is already being pursued. But she notes that implementing such a system would take years. According to Minister Williams, this would mean no $8 billion in revenue for the government in the short term.
So we would be looking at fiscal year 2028-29 to begin to see a working e-invoicing system in Jamaica. Contrary to what the opposition spokesman on finance would have us believe, there are no revenues to be earned from e-invoicing that the opposition spokesman on finance could credibly include in the budget for this upcoming fiscal year. Or even the next fiscal year. Madam Speaker, it not go work. It not go work.
She also challenged Robinson's proposed digital nomad program, which aims to attract foreign remote workers to Jamaican shores. She pointed out that the program has not proven to be the magic bullet for the other territories where it has already been implemented. Minister Williams similarly questioned the logic of pulling $1 billion from a growth-inducing entity such as the Factories Corporation of Jamaica, FCJ, potentially impairing its mandate. According to the finance minister, if the PNP's proposals were pursued, the country would be forced into years of additional borrowing. She says this is not a gamble the current administration is willing to take.
We will not gamble with the future of our country. We do not seek to score cheap political points by entrusting the future of the vulnerable, the continued stability of the Jamaican dollar, the sustainability of our national debt, and our hard-earned reputation for central government's prudent financial management on the fantasy of major software upgrade happening overnight. Madam Speaker, we have chosen the path of fiscal responsibility because it is the only credible path.
Siobhan Campbell for Nationwide News.
Well, that's the finance minister in the parliament today as she closed the 2026 budget debate. Wow.
Last month, the government announced that in the upcoming fiscal year, a special consumption tax, SCT, would be added to non-alcoholic sweetened beverages. The measure, cited by the government as an attempt to encourage healthier lifestyles, would have seen these drinks be taxed at 2 cents per milliliter. The SCT is projected to bring in $10 billion in revenue. But local manufacturers are against the tax. President of the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association, JMEA, Catherine Silvera, labeled it as an unfair burden on local beverage manufacturers. The opposition also rubbished the tax, instead proposing a removal of taxes on water to encourage healthy living. But as she closed the budget debate on Tuesday, Finance Minister Favour Williams announced that following dialogue with stakeholders, the tax will now be applied based on the sugar content.
A volumetric tax is straightforward to calculate, to collect, and to verify. However, stakeholders pointed out, and we agreed, that a flat volume-based tax does not vary by sugar content and therefore does not distinguish between a low sugar and a high sugar product. We took that concern seriously, and because health has always been the underlying intent of the measure, we have redesigned the SCT to be based directly on sugar content rather than on the volume of the beverage.
She explained the rate at which the tax would be added to drinks. She also announced a delay in the implementation of the tax. This is to allow all stakeholders to properly prepare.
The special consumption tax on non-alcoholic sweetened beverage will therefore be levied at a rate of 22 cents per gram of added sugar rather than on the volume of the beverage. Madam Speaker, this change will require some lead time for manufacturers, importers, and our tax administration to prepare. As a result, the SCT will go into effect on May 1, 2026 instead of April 1, as previously announced.
Minister Williams sought to remind local manufacturers that the goal of the tax is to create healthier products for the public.
We will continue a structured dialogue with both the beverage industry and with health professionals on how this measure can be strengthened and improved over time. To manufacturers and importers, the message is straightforward. Reduce the sugar in your products, and the tax burden falls. The government is not seeking to harm a sector that employs thousands of Jamaicans. We're changing the incentive structure, and we believe the industry is fully capable of responding to it.
Mahiri Stewart for Nationwide News.
All right, so here we have it again, courtesy of Nationwide News Network. Good evening to you, Scratchy. Hello, Scratchy, are you there? Let's try again. Hello, Scratchy. No. Harry, are you there, sir?
Your neighbor. Night, everybody.
Yes. Harry, the finance minister closed the budget presentation today. Any highlights?
Just a few, neighbor.
Yes.
I wouldn't even call them highlight because Politics Plus would have pointed them out long before they come to the fray. But the beautiful thing about it, neighbor, was that the finance minister explicitly actually came out and stated for Jamaica to know that the opposition outrightly would have been looking to borrow funds for recurring expenditure, right? And you can't be borrowing money for things that will never ever drive any form of returns. And again, in terms of recurring expenditure, those are, for example, the payment of salaries and bills that are happening every single year. And she would have stated that these are things the opposition would have, if they were in power, they would have actually been looking to continuous borrowed. Now, that in itself would have put the burden on everybody, neighbor. It doesn't matter if you're the least vulnerable or the most vulnerable. Everybody, it's going to be on the backs of everybody for generations to come. So it is not one that is separated. And that in itself is not something you want to put on the backs of Jamaicans, not especially when we've been fiscally prudent and fiscally responsible for such a while, to reduce our debt that greatly, right? It would have been reversing the gains that Jamaicans have actually, made serious sacrifices for to put us going forward. Now, one of the big things that was pointed out, neighbor, I don't think she stated it in its entirety on her first presentation, but she gave clarity. The aspect of what they call a sandboxing, right? It's really a technique used in terms of creating a simulation environment to prepare a potential future listing companies. So in a sense, what it does is that companies who would have passed the first phase that they're looking to list on the stock exchange, they go through a series of, call it pre-testing, as to how the actual market works. So what they do within this simulation is that whatever happens in the market, they test the products and the level of returns, just like the normal operation of these companies, to see if they would be able to live the life of the stock exchange, which is every quarter. So when you're listed, neighbor, they normally state that a company lives by quarters, right? And as such, to properly put these companies through a test to ensure that they can provide value, not just for the investors when they come to market, but also value throughout the economy. That is, returns, creating jobs for people, production, export, returns, all of that. So that for me was really good, because they're actually looking to expand the stock exchange, neighbor, which actually expose a lot of Jamaican companies who may need funding, rather than raising the usual debt where you go to the banks and borrow money at high interest rate, neighbor. It does two things. It gives these companies the opportunity to raise more money. And in fact, they can raise on the junior market a maximum of $750 million. For the main market, it's a lot higher than that. And that is funding where companies can get. Plus, it allows Jamaicans, neighbor, both the diaspora and local, to invest in companies locally and get returns and, bring back that national pride in Jamaica. So that I thought was one of the biggest highlight. The other one, which we spoke on, neighbor, regarding the SCT tax on sugar beverages, where we would have broken it down to say, if it was one that they looked at for the sugar content, it will take them a revision, which would take into consideration the manufacturers. So a discussion would have to be had with the manufacturers, which they did. So we actually preempted that in our first announcement. And the beautiful thing about it is that now we're going to see different tiers, sugar drinks that has no added sugar. So rather than on the volume as before, which was 2 cents in terms of milliliters, it is now 22 cents per gram of added sugar. So if you look at the back of any beverage, neighbor, you normally see what the sugar content is, and then you see added sugar. It's going to be on that in which they are being charged. Now, there are going to be 3 tiers, one where there's no sugar added. So, of course, no SCT will be applied. Then they'll have moderate. And as such, they will see a specific range. She didn't state yet, but I know they're at the drawing table with manufacturers, neighbor, to ensure that, they find amicable ground, want to balance everything, because they don't want to do it without the manufacturers there. You want to have some form of consensus going forward. So I saw that as something really good. It really shows, neighbor, that this administration is one in which they are inclusive, right?
Yes.
Whether it is putting forward the best solution they see fit, they then incorporate, Jamaicans, the sectors, the institutions, to ensure that they can find that middle ground. So each stakeholder or shareholder can actually benefit in the right way. So there's no taking advantage of, because that is definitely key when going forward. So I thought that was really good. Now, I know she broke down in terms of both the opposition finance minister and the opposition leader. She broke down how they would have mismanaged the funds, because the Nomad, for example, neighbor, and again, we covered this extensively.
Yes.
There's no way it would have reaped any form of returns. And I know they made reference to Barbados. I'm happy the minister came and state that the returns that Barbados is seeing, even 5 years after, is I don't want to say negligible, but it's barely modest, right? So it is not something that we see where you expect to get any form of returns to that magnitude with the opposition minister spoke of. I think he was projecting $1.2 billion, which was ridiculous, right? The electronic receipt in terms of the TAJ, that, I would have covered extensively, neighbor, to say that it doesn't work in terms of being applicable for Jamaica when we look at what our budget is about. This is one in which it's coming out of a crisis, and as such, you need to be able to be funded immediately. Definitely, it's one in which we're looking for medium to long term. Minister stated that possibly 2028, 2029, and that stood in the information that we put forward to our listeners, neighbor. So it shows that we're also doing great work, right? I might have to put you up there for a part of the financing, neighbor, because you're covering it good.
No, not at all. No, sir. You take time with me head. It's all about you. So the fact of the matter, Harry, is that in concise terms, stability first, growth second, and don't break what is working is basically what the finance minister was coming with us today. Strong focus, Harry, on fiscal discipline. Wouldn't you agree with me, Harry, even before we delve a little deeper into the specifics, that the economy is fundamental in a society's structure, well-being, and its ability to deliver to its people?
It is, neighbor. It definitely is. And it is one in which you have to find the balance. You have to strike that balance more now than ever between governance and the people that you are governing for, because you can't take advantage of them and you can't make decisions that will actually cause them more harm than good, both immediate, medium, and also long term.
Right. So the government is doubling down on macroeconomic stability as its core achievement. Is that not one of the focus coming out here? And would you explain to us and the listeners what this means, this whole matter of fiscal discipline? When we speak of fiscal discipline and macroeconomic stability, link it to the man on the street so that he understands.
So in essence, neighbor, the fiscal discipline is one in which the government has to be very keen. They have to be very shrewd when it comes on to how they spend. Specifically, spending, you want, when a government is spending any money that they get, whether revenue, it is one that not just, pays debt. You want it to be impactful in a way where it goes ahead and put back in terms of infrastructure, which creates opportunities for people. You want to ensure that it also goes ahead to create stability and sustainability in a way where it doesn't hurt any projections, it doesn't hurt any future decisions to be made, or very much, it doesn't derail the plans and aspirations of the people of Jamaica, which would see them going into some form of shock in the near future. And this specifically also speaks, neighbor, you don't want your government to be, increasing any borrowing policies. So point example was where the opposition minister said that they were going to take $1 billion from the BOJ. That is something you don't want your government to do. And this administration has ensured that they, I'd want to say, liberate BOJ from the government in itself. That was a very good one in which the government, Nigel Clark at the time, did. So what it does, it strips away any political allegiance or political influence when it comes on to those fiscal and monetary policies, neighbor, that may harm the people of Jamaica. And that in itself is one in which, the government has been targeted very well when it comes on to the fiscal responsibilities. In fact, they have gone ahead to empower the private sector more because no other sector really and truly in Jamaica, neighbor, or in any country, to be honest, actually has the capacity to expand and grow an economy exponentially as it should, because government is not necessarily in the business of profitability, right? They're there to create opportunities, ensure resources are there, empower human resources. But when you engage the private sector, you create more job opportunities for people, neighbor. You have a greater productivity because the private sector will be there for profit. They also have the technocrats. They have the know-how people, and that is where it comes in. They have the networking, and you need to pull them in. So the average man on the street, neighbor, or the 20-year-olds, which were the target for this budget debate, would now be able to see better opportunities. They'll also be guided in a way where when these opportunities come, they will be equipped. So for the average man, neighbor, it is one in which this government has taken the stand to say, let's grow this economy. Let's focus on the key driving factors that can push us through, that can not just gives us stability and sustainability, but also help us to grow, especially in a time like this, without taking advantage of the most vulnerable people.
Okay, hold on there for me. Is Scratchy there? Scratchy, are you there? Is Scratchy there? No. Not there. Not there yet. Okay. The second thing here, Harry, is that the government is continuing to focus on lowering the debt burden so that they are providing more room to spend. Debt servicing costs have significantly declined. This frees up money for health, for education, for infrastructure. So less money going to debt, more money available for people. What is the difference here, Harry, between this approach of the government of Jamaica versus what the opposition was proposing?
Well, what would have happened, neighbor, is that the current administration really is looking for the country to be more sustainable within itself, unleashing and unlocking areas that should have been grown, areas that has the capacity but never ever gotten the freedom to do so. All right. So, for example, we saw when it comes on to the pension fund, almost $900 billion just technically sitting there, not much of any form of risk. And that was money in which could have been empowered years ago. But we weren't in the right space. And as such, rather than going ahead to borrow any form of money, neighbor, once you've built out the framework that empowers the pension and insurance area, neighbor, you're now seeing where more money is able to come into the market. Money was already there in the market. It just wasn't being able, given the freedom to act on anything. It didn't have any action behind it. And this would have now enabled with this new money, neighbor, quote unquote per se, has allowed now, greater investments into different areas, whether that may be agriculture, whether that may be infrastructure, construction, anything along that line. And now it would have expanded. Now, if you don't do something like that, neighbor, then you have to then find an alternative. And the alternative may be additional taxation in the long run if you're not careful. And nobody wants to do that, especially not this administration. Now, what happens is that when you go ahead now and focus on building out the economy, attracting investments locally, regionally, and international, neighbor, you then being able to use any money you have in the budget to be more aggressive on the debt, because you would have not necessarily as a government use that any revenue you get to now try to build out infrastructure to try and create those opportunities. Because what happens now is that you limit yourself to either truly take on the task of growing the economy or expanding economy, and or being unable to be aggressive on the debt. But what we've seen is that this government has struck the balance, regardless as to the issues we've gone through, whether that is the pandemic or Melissa, which are two great, I'd say great injustice to how well Jamaican people have been doing and this administration. But what really took place was that because they've done the hard work, they've attracted investment, they can now diversify and divert more money towards the debt, which is something the opposition was strongly against, especially in the COVID period. Now, that is a major difference between both parties, neighbor, when you look at their leadership and handling, an economy. The opposition would have, as they said, party with the rent money. And what that really means, neighbor, is whatever gains and that would have been made within the sacrifice made over the last decade or so, they would want you to put that money back in the economy, not targeting anything really, just trying to give back people money, thinking that that is going to drive growth. But the truth of the matter is, when you give people back more money, it doesn't always stimulate the level of controlled and guided growth that you need, because consumers will always be consumers, neighbor. And what you want to do is that you want to foster an environment and an economy that enables and enact a lot more entrepreneurs, a lot more business people, so that they themselves can expand, they can grow, whether that is demanding more in terms of service, whether that's a service industry, which is more jobs being created, developing more in terms of for export, all of these things that would help your economy. But the opposition, neighbor, are more in terms of to almost give a feel good kind of thing, give back to people. So for example, the 3.5 million that they proposed during their election time, which they couldn't tell us how they would have funded it. That is the type of irresponsible behavior you would have gotten away with an administration like that. Even though the budget debate themselves, they couldn't tell us really and truly how any of their plans would have been applicable to the time now as a response for the issue that we're going through, the risk that has been, we've taken because of what happened with Melissa. They truly have not been able to even fund any of those. So the applicability is not there. The implementation wise, and also the numbers that they say they would have gotten, neighbor, is well and truly off. So it forces one in which to say what is the reality of our situation versus the perception of the opposition. And it shows that I think they're probably looking to manage an adjacent version of Jamaica and not live the reality of the people right now. Because when you double down on it and to see the plans they've flashed before the people's eyes in their budget speech, both the Minister of Finance and the opposition leader, these are things that sounds good, that will give you the limelight, that will give you the headlines on any newspaper, any media house. But the reality is none of it would actually been good for the economy and or help the people of Jamaica, knowing we would have lost 56% of our GDP. So that shows in which one, and the minister stated it, the current opposition has no experience whatsoever in how to handle these issues. And that is plain straight facts, because they've never been in the position, not back then and not now, to handle the actual finances of the people in the manner where it's a very delicate dance between keeping the people happy, ensure that the stress test is passed every single time, and also balancing the books to ensure that you still are able to achieve the goals and aspirations that these very people have dreamed. Now, what truly happened, and I would have spoken on this, neighbor, the opposition lacks the technocrats. They lack.
Expand that a little bit more for me. Speak. You've mentioned that before, but develop that a little bit more in terms of the team working with the finance minister versus what we could expect from Robinson et al.
Yeah. So when we look at, for example, the team that the current administration has, neighbor, it is well diversified. It is taken across several sectors and in terms of international network. So,
Yes.
for example, we're now cheering in terms of digital, I believe the digital service in the UN. Right, first we've ever been doing that, and that says to us that we now have an international pull. We're
Yes.
now seen as credible in terms of that team to be able to speak to the world and the world listens in that manner. And that has never been done with under any People's National Party regime and leadership. It has never ever been done. As much as we've heard, they've praised Omar Davis about this great thing and how good of a finance minister he is. He has never led anything on the international stage, right? And that shows in terms of how well you can equip and put a team together, right? And that is something I think Mr. Holness is extremely good at. I think it's probably a gift of his, to see how he has assembled. And that is a good thing when you come on to leadership.
Yes, because even in recent times with the appointment of the NARA head, and I think there's another one recruiting people. I'm forgetting his name.
Yeah. No, and with it, neighbor, in fact, they've opened it to ensure that they facilitate and foster a level of synergy of both persons who would have been, international and local. So it's not that they've closed it off. And how they've done it is that they ensure that there's policy and law, because the bill has been submitted in which NARA will be governed by. That is not something you just want to create a committee of who is in parliament with. And this is something that will be handling big money, neighbor, because NARA should be fast tracking within a year in terms of development of money, 150 million US and upwards. No, that is not something you want to be limited to just people in parliament or just who is already in government. You need international eyes, you need international experience. And once you're able to actually attract that, it means you have a vast variety of information and knowledge and experience to pull on. People would have done it in other countries, sat on international boards. Who knows? Who are the real technocrats, the movers and shakers of this world that you're knocking heads with per se. That is things that you can learn from them. You can impart it and implement it to the current state. With the opposition, neighbor, it has been highlighted massively in the speech for Julian, right? I know we've said it. If you put it in Google, you realize it's AI generated for a part of his speech, which is sad. I couldn't do anything like that for Minister Favour, right? You'd never find anything going verbatim that she said like that in Google AI. And I would have seen that. So it shows in terms of a lazy kind of approach, a more laissez-faire, not well thought out, not well structured. Because when I heard the electronic receipt, neighbor, and I came and I started to speak on it, you could have seen right through it that I did more research than the finance minister in less time. Because you would have known, based on the countries, if they ever actually had gone through, how, for example, Uruguay and Peru implemented this system, they would have realized that there's no way you can get a quote-unquote modest 2% return in tax, which for him was 8 billion, knowing very well that this system has never been implemented in the first year for any of the countries. Yeah. Right? So it shows that they're not keen to details, and that is a risk you run when it comes on to trying to grow an economy of this nature.
Right. And then the whole matter of defending the cushions that we need, because let's be reasonable and fair here, Harry. Stability is fragile, and you can't gamble with a nation's economic stability. In other words, when your net international reserves, you don't dip into that willy-nilly Harry. And also, you have to preserve the financial credibility of the country. And if Jamaica abandons its current path, we could find a situation where confidence in our management collapses. Is that so? That we have to defend the economic gains that we have made?
We have to, undoubtedly, but in fact, that is not up for negotiation, right? It is something that is compulsory, so you have to do it. In fact, I think the opposition has mistaken what the NIR is. There are inflows and outflows for the NIR neighbor. So it's not like money is just sitting there, doing nothing. There are times in which you have to utilize the funding of that for different things in terms of ensure that there's stability within the economy. Because any for example, if we need to purchase any goods or services overseas, that is exactly where the foreign exchange comes from. It is not one in which we just go ahead and just go buy US on the international stage. It is from out of the NIR in that manner. So when the opposition sees that money and think that, it is one in which we can just go into it, we can utilize it, we can quote unquote neighbor what they hide it under is empower the people by giving them money and spend out of the NIR. That is nonsense, because the truth is there are shocks that will come, there are shocks that will always happen in economies when because of how we are and where we are, right? Something can happen. We've seen it in 2007, the Great Recession. Now we've seen in terms of the pandemic neighbor, and then now we're seeing shocks when it comes down to a category 5 hurricane, which was really a category 6, and we lost 56% of our GDP. That in itself has to be one in which you preserve in a way. In fact, I believe Singapore, and don't quote me on this exact number, but I believe Singapore is roughly between 500 to about 900 billion US dollars for their reserves. And they aren't flaunting it around, neighbor. Right? They're well ahead as to what they actually need. And that says something about Jamaica.
Because there are so many things that we don't control. For example, what is happening now in the Middle East, Harry, very, very unexpected. Did you know that there's actually a project that I was associated with that should come on stream later this year. And it has to be pushed back for about 4 months, Harry, because of what's happening in the Middle East there.
Of course, neighbor, a lot of that has to be done.
Yeah.
Because you have even simple companies, neighbor. For example, companies can get money from the stock exchange. A lot of companies that were lining up to come to market late last year to this year, they have forego it. They have to probably wait another year or two for things to settle, so they can balance the books, so they can know where they're going, and to try ensure that everything is stable within their company. It is no different for the country overall. And that is something in which you have to ensure that you keep in mind. In fact, I believe the opposition think that there's a number. Maybe Ralston Hyman can help them out. But I think they have this idea as if there's a number where if the NIR reaches, we can then stop. It is not something that you ever stop. You have to continue, because you don't know what is going to be required in the future. As you grow, as you expand, there are things that will be required of you, and there's a level of protection that you will need. And that NIR has given us the stability. Remember, our rating has not gone below stability despite losing 56% in a neighbor.
Yes.
Right? Standards and Poor as stated it.
Yes, but let me ask you a political question, Harry. There is no election on the horizon. Maybe some by-elections, a local government election maybe in a year or two. Why would the opposition risk putting out an alternative economic model that is so risky so early in the term? I mean, what is the strategy behind this?
So for
and
one
then
neighbor,
hold on, and then to go on a media campaign to promote it, because they have been everywhere except here.
they know that they have to target areas, neighbor, where they won't be. They won't find any combat. They won't find any rebuttal. They won't find those persons actually seeing and pointing out all the loopholes in whatever they're putting forward. In fact, neighbor, it is one in which two things is to remain relevant. That's one. And two, it is out of fear. And I'll break down both. Now, the relevancy, neighbor, with what's happening, if you look at and we've seen the stress test of the people. Jamaica doesn't feel as if we have gone through losing 56% of our GDP. It
Not
doesn't
at all.
feel as if we've been hit by the third largest and worst natural disaster in 174 years in the Atlantic. It just doesn't feel that way. Of course, we know the reality is a little different, but normally when a nation, especially of this size, neighbor, goes through any form of natural disaster, any disaster of that nature, like this, you will and should feel some form of unsettlement, some form of burden, but you don't necessarily see it from the people of Jamaica.
A very
And that
resilient
would be-
economy in my view, Harry, and that's a great point. Maybe that's something that we need to spend a little bit of time on one of these nights to look at the stress test that the economy went through, and why is it that people in St. Catherine, Kingston, Manchester, I mean, it is true. There is not much of a feeling in the country that we've just had 50% of our GDP just blown away by a storm.
Exactly, and it is one, and we can look in terms of neighbor agriculture got the most one of the most serious hit.
Yes, sir.
Ever.
And cabbage is now $30 a pound.
Yeah, that's what I heard, neighbor. I heard it even
You
today.
eat cabbage, sir?
Yes, neighbor.
You like it?
Neighbor, if I had curry cabbage, neighbor, I probably have to look container.
curry. No, I haven't had the curry cabbage. But you say to
Bad
me,
neighbor, bad man.
wow. Yes. There's a little shortage of yam. But no, man. No. Go ahead. You're onto something there.
It shows in which, neighbor, what we've achieved in the last decade.
Yes.
Because I can tell you this in a neighbor. If we compare the level of, let's look at the stress test as to what happened with Ivan, which was
Yes.
significantly smaller, right? And look at where the economy was compared to now. You can see and feel the vast difference as to what is the lived reality and as to how a government would have achieved it.
Yes.
And I've said it. A lot of people didn't understand or didn't know that these are some of the things in that decade of preparation. And we would have touched a series on preparation, neighbor, what it means to be prepared and how to be prepared, what the government was doing before the disaster. It is not about the whole rice and how much flour you can send go down to the west. It was the fiscal responsible and the risk management that the people bought into, because it wasn't easy. The first 2-3 years was very hard, neighbor.
Yes.
Right? To get the people to form this new habit, to now also understand why they're forming this new habit.
By the way, I'm just getting a message here that there is a crowd gathered listening to you, sir, in a particular place in Jamaica on flat screen. They're beaming it through one of those loudspeaker boxes. Fascinating stuff happening here. Great job, brother. By the way, Harry, I am so impressed that 300 people are here on this page. There is another almost 300 and more on the For You listening, and they are all tuned into you now. And they're listening to what we're saying. This is not one of those sexy political discussion. This is about, economics, and the people are still tuned in. Congratulations, listeners. I like that.
Well, I don't think they ever get this anywhere else apart from politics.
Yeah, I'm hearing that you're on big screen now. They're beaming it through one of the boxes. People are gathered listening to what is happening. Fantastic. Good going, sir. Go ahead.
So
By the way, protecting Jamaica. I'll take you up soon. Okay, just hang on there for me. Give me a little time, sir. Taking you up soon. All right, great. Go ahead, sir.
So when we look at it, neighbor, and have a greater understanding as to know, because of course you have to look back to move forward. And I'm challenging everybody, every Jamaican, diaspora and locally. I'm challenging them to look at where they were 10 years ago.
Yes.
And understand the metamorphosis that they would have gone through, the change, the transformation. Yes. Because it happened psychologically and mentally first before it ever happened financially for them, right? Uh-huh. Before it was transitioned into the physical, whether that is the brick and mortar of adding on a room or, transitioning into a different job, whatever it may be. It was a psychological change that happened. And I think they should also give themselves grace and appreciate that process, right? Yes. Now, what we're seeing is a continued process because, of course, when you do great work, neighbor, the reward is to do more work.
Yes.
And that is what the people of Jamaica are going through.
They get more work.
A new chapter, right? But the thing about it is that they've now grown. Whatever that they thought would have weakened them and they would have made it through, they have surprised themselves and they're now continuing. So it simply means that the work not finished. There's more dreams to be dreamt. There are more dreams to become realities.
Yes,
and
sir.
That is how we're doing it. So the opposition themselves, neighbor, has seen that, right? And they want to be remaining relevant in the terms that they don't have a lot to offer as it stands, right? And now what that does is you have to find, whether it be sound bites, whether it be viral moments, whether it be anything to get publicity, they have to pull all of those strings out, all the stops, to at least be seen somewhere, somehow. Because the truth is, what really matters, they can't challenge on. And that is the forefront of managing an economy of this nature, and also balancing that with the aspirations of the people, with the demands, because the standard has been pushed higher than ever before. We're demanding more, and that is shown in the minimum wage thing increase, neighbor, where people say it's just $1,000. And it's a good thing to hear that people say it's just $1,000, because it simply means they've gone ahead from back in the days when it was a $200 going on and the highest of a $500 going on.
The expectation
has been risen, neighbor. It is the highest it has been to date, right? And that is a challenge, a beautiful challenge to have as an administration, neighbor, who wants to move
when you raise
forward.
People's expectations. Yeah?
Definitely, right? And as such, have to find a new personal best, right? You have to now live up to every potential. You have to now break any form of a ceiling that you've set, neighbor. It's like the Olympics and you run personal best in the semis, but you barely win. Now you're going to the final. You have to have a new personal best. And that is a challenge the people of Jamaica is giving and putting on the shoulders of this administration. And they've actually been breaking a lot of records, neighbor, left, right, and center. Every time we think they've hit somewhere that they can't go beyond, they've surprised themselves. And as such, the opposition themselves have to now find a viral moments. But that, neighbor, because they haven't gotten a breakthrough, it has driven fear in them now being obsolete, in them now being one in which they're no longer a viable option to the people of Jamaica. And the third term has signaled that heavily to them. And Melissa has now, neighbor, probably, right, put the first nail in the coffin for them if they're not careful. Because once this administration gets this recovery from resilience to resurgence, once they get it right,
yes, sir,
the opposition has a serious battle.
I tell you,
to not just rebrand themselves, but to now find new ways, find other things to actually catch the eye of Jamaicans.
Yes, but so far, the government has kind of not dropped any ball, you know.
No.
Yes, world leading is the mantra from the international community.
It is, and more neighbor, we're seeing the global and international institutions embracing the leadership, not the lead. Not the leader, you know, neighbor. I want people to understand the difference, not the leader, right? The leadership, because one of the beautiful thing, neighbor, is that when you have a great leader, he doesn't have to be the center of it. And we've seen it. You remember when they said Andrew shouldn't have gone to the geo thing in Africa?
G20.
Right? G20. Because who's going to run the country? Neighbor, we did miss the Prime Minister?
Not at all.
Wasn't
a little bit
done?
A little bit.
Wasn't the relief being done because the team that has been assembled?
Not only that, sir, but you can lead from anywhere in the world. Just a phone call and you're on your phone. Come on. You can definitely Zoom in, you can video call, you can do all type of things, sir.
But it is one in which he has empowered his team and handpicked so great in terms
just like how I want to empower you so you can start hosting this program in my absence, sir.